A modern ship can weigh tens of thousands of tons. Some are basically floating skyscrapers. So here's the weird question. How can one chunk of metal dropped into a muddy seafloor stop a massive ship from wandering away? The truth is, anchors don't work mainly because they're heavy. They work because they're sneaky. They dig, rotate, bury themselves, and use physics to turn the seabed into a kind of underwater brake pad for the whole ship. And once you see how it works, you'll never look at that classic anchor symbol the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll know why a ship doesn't just toss an anchor straight down and hope for the best, why the chain is almost as important as the anchor itself, and why ancient sailors basically started with rocks. Welcome back to Plain Truth Science Channel. Today we're taking a deep dive into one simple but fascinating question. How do ship anchors work? And if you like smart explanations made simple, this is a great time to like the video and subscribe. Because yes, there is a lot more hidden science in everyday objects than anyone warned us about. Now, let's dive in. First, let's kill the biggest myth. A ship anchor is not just dead weight sitting on the bottom. If weight alone did the job, then any giant metal block would work. But ships have to deal with wind, waves, currents, and the slow but relentless pull of moving water. A plain heavy object would just drag across the seabed like a very expensive mistake. What really matters is something called holding power. An anchor works when parts called flukes, those broad, pointed arms, bite into the seabed. Then, as the ship pulls on the chain, the anchor gets dragged into a position where it digs deeper instead of popping back out. That's the clever part. The harder the right kind of anchor is pulled, the more effectively it can bury itself. Not always, of course. The seabed matters a lot. Sand and firm mud are great. Rock, weeds, or very soft sludge, much less cooperative. That's why anchoring is part science, part seamanship, and part reading an underwater landscape you can't actually see. So no, an anchor isn't really grabbing the ocean floor like a hand. It's using shape, angle, and friction to build resistance. And that brings us to the unsung hero of the whole system, the chain. Now, when a ship drops anchor, the goal is not to have the chain go straight down like an elevator cable. That would actually make the anchor easier to yank out. Instead, the ship releases a long length of chain, so it curves through the water and lies partly along the seabed. That curve is called a catenary. It sounds fancy, but the idea is simple. Gravity makes the heavy chain sag, and that sag helps keep the pull on the anchor as horizontal as possible. Why does that matter? Because anchors like being pulled low and flat. A horizontal pull helps the fluke stay buried down. An upward pull can pry them loose, which is exactly what you do not want when your ship is supposed to stay put. So the system works like this. The anchor lands, the ship slowly drifts back, the chain stretches out, the anchor rotates into the right position, the flukes dig in, and the seabed starts fighting back. That resistance is what holds the ship. And here's a neat little twist. Once the anchor is properly set, part of the holding force comes not only from the anchor itself, but from the mass of seabed packed around it. At that point, the ship is no longer just pulling on metal. It's pulling against buried geometry and compacted earth underwater. Why there are different types of anchors? Over time, humans figured out that different seafloors need different tools. The earliest anchors were literally stones tied to ropes. They relied mostly on weight and friction. That worked for small ancient boats, but ships got bigger, heavier, and much less interested in drifting into danger. So anchor design evolved. The old fisherman's anchor, the iconic pirate-looking one, used a crossbar called a stock to force one fluke downward into the seabed. Later came the stockless anchor, patented in the 1800s and now common on large ships. It's easier to handle, easier to store, and its flukes can pivot so they dig in as the ship pulls.
For smaller vessels, you'll also find designs like Danforth anchors or plow anchors, built to bury deeply in sand or mud. And for permanent moorings, there's the mushroom anchor, which sinks and settles into the bottom over time. At this point, you might be wondering, if all anchors do the same basic job, why not just invent one perfect anchor? And the answer is simple. Because the seabed is annoyingly diverse.
Sand behaves differently from clay. Mud behaves differently from rock. And currents, water depth, and even the amount of chain you let out can change the result. In other words, anchoring is what happens when engineering meets geology, in the least convenient place possible, underwater. And if you're enjoying this video so far, please like and subscribe to the channel. It takes just a second, and it really helps. The bigger science lesson. What I love about anchors is that they reveal a bigger truth about science. Stability doesn't always come from brute force. Sometimes it comes from alignment. A good anchor works because its shape matches its environment, because the pull angle is controlled, and because the whole system is allowed to settle into a stable configuration. That's not just maritime engineering. That's physics everywhere. The anchor doesn't defeat the ocean. It negotiates with it. And there's something strangely human in that. The ship still moves a little. It swings with the wind and tide, but it stays secure because the forces are managed, not eliminated. Now, quick reality check. Anchors are not magic. If the seabed is poor, the weather gets worse, or the anchor isn't set correctly, ships can drag anchor and drift. So even after centuries of design improvements, this is still a system that depends on judgment, which honestly makes it even cooler. So how do ship anchors work? Not by simply being heavy, but by landing the right way, pulling low, digging in, and turning the seabed into part of the system. From ancient stones to modern stockless steel designs, the idea has stayed surprisingly elegant. Use shape, force, and friction to make a floating giant hold still. So the next time you see an anchor symbol on a tattoo, a logo, or the side of a ship, remember, it represents one of the smartest bits of practical physics ever dropped overboard. If you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what everyday object should we decode next?